All right, so we're continuing on with writing the equation of a line. And what we did yesterday was write an equation of lines that are parallel, finding parallel lines and finding slopes and seeing if, or using slopes to determine if two lines are parallel and then using that and a point to kind of find an equation. So what we're doing today is not dealing with parallel, but perpendicular. Now, two lines in the same plane that intersect to form right angles are perpendicular lines. Non-vertical lines are perpendicular if and only if their slopes are negative reciprocals or opposite reciprocals. So the slopes, one is going to be positive, one's going to be negative, and they're reciprocal, they're the flip. So when we look at this one here, these two lines that are given in this picture, one of the slopes is -2. So the slope for this one line here, I'll get a highlighter out. This slope here is -2. Now the opposite of a negative would be a positive. So since one's negative, the other has to be positive. As we can see here, the slope of the other line is positive. Now, since the slope of 1 was -2, so 2, the reciprocal of 2, when we flip 2, we get 1/2. So one of the slopes was -2, and we can say over 1. Its opposite would be positive, and the reciprocal, we flipped it, so 1 would go on top and 2 would go on bottom. So to have the opposite reciprocal, it would go from -2 to +1/2. We change the sign and flip it. So for perpendicular slopes, they would be the same. So we change the sign and flip it. So if one slope is -2, well, to get the opposite reciprocal, we change the sign and flip it. So it goes from negative to positive, and we flip it from 2 to 1/2. So if two lines are perpendicular, they have opposite reciprocal slopes. We change the sign and flip it. And so what we're going to do first is kind of identifying whether lines are parallel or perpendicular, if any, if they are. It could be not. So what we're going to do is we're looking at the slopes, because the slopes tell us if the lines are parallel or perpendicular. Because if the slopes are the same, then the lines are parallel. If the slopes are opposite reciprocals, it's the change the sign and flip it, then they are perpendicular. But for us to be able to tell this, we really need all of these equations in our y equals mx plus b form. Because if they're in y equals mx plus b, then we can tell the slope pretty easily because it's our m, and we can see what lines are parallel or perpendicular. Now looking at these three here, well, one of them is already in our slope-intercept form. And that's line A. Line A is already in slope-intercept form. Y equals 4x plus 2. It's already there. Line B and line C are not. We need to get them in our slope-intercept form. Now the first one we're going to look at, let's just start with line B. X plus 4y equals 3. So we need to get y by itself. Now the first thing I'm going to do to get y by itself is to move the x over to the other side. To do that, I'm going to subtract x from both sides, because x minus x will cancel, leaving me with 4y is equal to -x plus 3. So we can move the x over by subtracting it from both sides. Now at this point here, we do have y. There's only y on one side, but we have 4 of them. So we still need to simplify further, and the way that we would do that is by dividing both sides, or dividing everything by 4. Because 4 divided by 4, 4y divided by 4, the 4 and 4 would simplify, leaving me with just y, is equal to, well, here we have negative x over 4, or we can say -1/4 x plus 3/4. Or we'll move the x up top for now. So this here is really -x over 4 plus 3/4. Now here we really like it as m, the slope, to be by itself multiplied by x. And now what it works out is that -1/4 times x is the same as negative x over 4, because when we multiply by the numerator. So we can move the x over, and we leave the number that's being multiplied with x, which would be negative 1, up top, plus 3/4. And now that we've done that, we've gotten the slope. Where's this here? So our slope for our first line was, the slope of line A is 4. The slope of line B is negative 1/4. Now before we analyze anything, we're going to go on and find the slope of line C, because once we have all three, then we can really look at them. Now looking at line C, we're going to need to do the exact same thing that we did on line B, is we need to get it in slope-intercept form. So we need to get y by itself. Now the first thing we can do is we can add 2x to both sides. Because when I add 2x to both sides, we'll simplify, because negative 2x plus 2x here would cancel. And what that'll leave me with is negative 8y is equal to 2x plus 16. So we're closer to getting y by itself. Now it's not completely by itself, because we have this negative 8 with y. So what we have to do is we have to divide everything by negative 8. And when I divide everything by negative 8, well, negative 8y divided by negative 8 will leave me with just y. And it would be positive, because a negative and a negative will make a positive. Now in our next one, we have 2 divided by negative 8. Well, that would be negative 1/4, because when we simplify, 2 over 8 will simplify to 1/4. And because the 8 is negative, the whole thing would be negative. And 16 divided by negative 8 would be negative 2. And we're done. We have y by itself. So we have all three of these in slope-intercept form. And we have our slopes. So the three slopes that we have are y equals 4x plus 2. So 4. Our first slope is 4. Our second slope was negative 1/4. And our third slope was negative 1/4. So we have these three here. So let's look at the slopes. Well, we have 4. So line A, slope is 4. Line B, slope is negative 1/4. And line C's slope is negative 1/4 also. So we have these three slopes here. And that's what we found. That's what we use as equations to find. Now I'm going to erase this work here. So if you're still trying to copy it down or whatnot, you can go back and rewatch it if you need. Now we said two lines are parallel if their slopes are the same. So if they have the exact same slope, so not just the same number, but also the same sign. It has to be the exact same. Then they are parallel. Well, if we look at this here, lines B and C both have a slope of negative 1/4. So what that means for us is that line B and line C are parallel because they have the same slope. Because they have the same slope, it means that they are parallel. And that's it. That's what we can say. Because they're the same slope, they're parallel. That's all we need. And these two would be parallel. Now the other part that we're looking at is perpendicular. That's what's new. Perpendicular. So if two lines have perpendicular slopes, they are the opposite reciprocal. The opposite reciprocal. So one of the slopes we have is 4. So we have a slope of 4. Move this up here. And that's what we're looking at. I'm not worried too much about any of this up here. Let's look at just 4. Now, if I had the opposite reciprocal of 4, then that slope would be perpendicular. So let's find the opposite reciprocal of 4 and then try to see if we have it. Because the opposite reciprocal, if two slopes are the opposite reciprocal, then they are perpendicular. So when I look at the number 4, well, opposite, because it's positive, the opposite would make it negative. Reciprocal, we flip it. Change the sign and flip it. So 4 would go on bottom and 1 would be on top. So the opposite reciprocal of a line with a slope of 4 would be negative 1/4. We changed the sign and flipped it. Now, with 4, what we really don't say is that this is really divided by 1. There's really a division of 1, because any whole number is always over 1. We just never write it. So we changed it from positive to negative and flipped it and put the number 1 on top. Well, hey, don't we have two slopes that are negative 1/4? Well, we do. B and C. So what that means for us is that line A and line B are perpendicular. It also means that line A and line C are perpendicular. It works out that they are perpendicular to each other. Line A is not only perpendicular to line B, but line A is also perpendicular to line C because those slopes are opposite reciprocals. Since these two are opposite reciprocals, they're perpendicular. And since these two are opposite reciprocals, they are perpendicular as well because of our slopes being opposite reciprocals. And that's it. That's all we have to do for this here. So let's look at another one here. Let's look at these here. Now, luckily, they did give us one line already. Line A, they already gave us the slope, 2/3. And it already is in y equals mx plus b form. Now, the other two, unfortunately, are not. So we need to rewrite those in slope. Now, I went on and typed them out down here below so that we have them and we can work with them. But we want these here. We want both of these equations for line B and line C in slope-intercept form. B, C. Now, when we look at this here, the first thing we need to do is we need to get the x onto the other side. We need to get y by itself. So the first thing I can do is subtract 3x from both sides. Because 3x minus 3x here, these will cancel. And when I do that, what I'm left with is 2y is equal to negative 3x plus 8. Because we're moving it from one side to the other by subtracting it from both sides. Now at this point here, we're almost done. We almost have it in y equals mx plus b form. We need to get y by itself, and right now we have 2y. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide everything by 2. And 2 divided by 2, or 2y divided by 2, will give us y. 1y is equal to, well, here we're going to have negative 3/2. So we'll have negative 3/2 x when we divide. So when we divided, we'd have negative 3/2 x plus, well, 8 divided by 2 is 4. So our equation for this here, for line B, when it's written in y equals mx plus b form, is going to be y equals negative 3/2 x plus 4. And we'll move it up here. I'll move it up here so it's right next to line B. So that's it in slope-intercept form. And that's the first thing we need to do. We need to get all these written in slope-intercept form so it's easier to look at the slope so we can see what we have. So that was line B. Now we're going to do the same thing for line C. We're going to get y by itself. Now the first thing we need to do in getting y by itself is we need to move x over to the other side. So what we'll do is we're going to add 2x to both sides. Well, negative 2x plus 2x here will cancel. And when they cancel, what we're left with is 3y is equal to 2x minus 9. Because we added 2x to both sides. And we normally want to move 2x to the front. So we have it up front. And we get this here. Now at this point here, we need to get y by itself. Still, we don't need 3y, we just need 1y. So we're going to divide everything by 3. And the reason we do this is because 3y divided by 3 will give us 1y, or just y. 2 divided by 3 will not simplify, so it'll just be 2/3. So we have 2/3 x minus, well, 9 divided by 3 will give us 3, or negative 3. So our equation for line C, when we get it into slope-intercept form, once we move 2x over by adding 2x, and then dividing by 3 to get y by itself, we got y is equal to 2/3 x minus 3. And I'll move it up here. A copy of it right here. So now we have all three equations in slope-intercept form. So we're not worried about these here because if you remember, these here are standard form. We want them in slope-intercept form. Because in slope-intercept form, we can easily look at the slopes of all three of these lines. So the slopes of each one of these lines here are, well, we have 2/3 for line A, negative 3/2, negative 3 over 2 for line B, and 2/3 for line C. Now, what the equation and what the problem was wanting us to do was to figure out which lines are parallel and which ones are perpendicular. So two lines are parallel if they have the exact same slope. So same numbers, same signs. Well, we do have two that are the exact same, because line A is 2/3 and line C is 2/3. So since those two have the exact same slope, it means that line A and line C are parallel to each other. They are parallel lines because they have the same slope. Because lines that have the same slope are parallel. And those two, out of these three, are the only two that are parallel because they're the only two with the exact same slope. Now, for the slope to be perpendicular, it has to be the opposite reciprocal. We have to change the sign and flip it. And so one of the slopes that we have is 2/3. So we'll start with line A. And let's see here. So I'm going to take line A's slope and find its perpendicular slope and see if any match. Because if they would match up to its perpendicular slope, it means those two lines are perpendicular. Okay, so we're looking at 2/3, and we want to see what is the perpendicular slope of 2/3, kind of line A. Well, perpendicular slope is the opposite reciprocal. We change the sign and flip it. So since 2/3 is positive, well, if we change the sign, it would be negative. And if we flip it, the 3 would go from the bottom to the top, and the 2 would go from the top to the bottom. So the opposite reciprocal of 2/3 would be negative 3/2. Well, do we have that? Well, yes. Line B's slope is negative 3/2. So what that means for us is that line A and line B are perpendicular. They are perpendicular to each other because they have the opposite reciprocal slopes. They have opposite reciprocal slopes. Well, hey, line C is 2/3 as well. And its opposite reciprocal is also negative 3/2. So what that means is line C and line B are also perpendicular. They would also be perpendicular slopes because their slopes are not perpendicular slopes. The lines would be perpendicular because their slopes are the opposite reciprocal of each other. And we have this here. And that's all we have to do for this here, because once we got the slopes and we could see, okay, that 2/3 opposite reciprocal is negative 3/2. Okay, so line A and B are perpendicular because they're opposite reciprocals. B and C have the same opposite reciprocal slope, so those two are perpendicular also. And A and C are parallel because they have the exact same slope. And that's all we need to do for this here. So we're done with this problem. We're going to do it again. We're going to do one more of these here. Now these here, they did give us one. One of these is already in slope-intercept form, and that's line B. and it's told us our slope is 3. So if any of the other lines have a slope of 3, it means that they are going to be parallel. So let's work with line A first and get it into slope-intercept form, our y equals mx plus b form. We want to get y by itself. And the first thing we can do in getting y by itself is going to be to subtract 2x from both sides. Because when we subtract 2x from both sides, we're going to get y by itself, or get closer to having y by itself. Because 2x minus 2x will cancel, leaving me with 6y is equal to negative 2x minus 3. So we're a little bit closer in getting y by itself. Because now we just have 6y. So we only have one thing with y, and that's the 6. And that's what we're going to do next. We're going to get it, make it go away by dividing everything by 6. Because when I divide everything by 6, well, 6y divided by 6, well, 6 divided by 6 is 1. So we're just left with y. Now, negative 2 divided by 6, well, that will reduce to 1/3, negative 1/3. So when we do negative 6 divided, or negative 2 divided by 6, we get negative 1/3 x minus, well, negative 3 divided by 6 will also reduce to 1/2, because 3 over 6 will reduce to 1/2. So our equation that we end up getting when we write line A in slope-intercept form is y equals negative 1/3 x minus 1/2. And that's our equation, and that's what we were going for because, again, y equals mx plus b. M is our slope. The number in front of x in this form is the slope. So the slope for this line is negative 1/3. And we're done with this one here. Well, we're not completely done. We're just done having it or writing it in slope-intercept form. We're going to come back to it later, but we need to do the same thing with line C, because we need to write line C in slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b form. So the first thing we're going to do to get y by itself is to subtract 18x from both sides of the equal sign. Because 18x minus 18x, these here will cancel. And when they cancel out, we're left with negative 6y is equal to negative 18x plus 9. Negative 18x plus 9. So we move the 18x from one side to the other. So we're closer to getting it into y equals mx plus b form. We just need to get y by itself. And to do that, I'm going to divide everything by negative 6, the number in front of x. Divide by negative 6. Well, negative 6 divided by negative 6, anything divided by itself is 1, so we're just left with our y is equal to, well, negative 18 divided by negative 6, the negative and negative would make it positive. 18 divided by 6 would be 3. So we'd have 3x. Now, 9 divided by negative 6, positive and a negative would make it negative, so we'd have minus. And 9 divided by 6 will reduce to 3/2. So when we get line C in slope-intercept form, we get y equals 3x minus 3/2. And now that we have this here, we have all three slopes. So we have all three lines in slope-intercept form, which tell us the slopes. So for line A, the slope is negative 1/3. For line B, the slope is 3. And for line C, the slope is 3. Now, two lines are parallel if their slopes are the exact same. Well, line B and line C both have a slope of positive 3. So these two lines are parallel, because any lines that are parallel have the same slope. And those two are going to be parallel because their slopes are the exact same. Now, there aren't any other same slopes besides B and C and B, because those both have 3. A does not have is not parallel to B and C because their slopes are not the exact same. Now, looking at this here, well, it could be perpendicular. Because for it to be perpendicular, we have to have the opposite reciprocal. Because if the slopes are opposite reciprocals, then they are perpendicular. Well, the opposite reciprocal of 3, positive 3, well, the opposite would make it negative. And the reciprocal of 3, because we have 3 over 1. If I flip it, it would become 1 over 3. Let me try to write that a little bit better. Write that 3 a little better. So the opposite reciprocal of positive 3, a slope of positive 3, would be a slope of negative 1/3. Well, hey, that is the slope of line A. So it means line B and line A are perpendicular because they have opposite reciprocal slopes. So I can say that line A and line B are perpendicular because they have opposite reciprocal slopes. Well, hey, line C and line A also have opposite reciprocal slopes. So they are also perpendicular. And that's it. Line B and C are parallel because they have the exact same slope. And line A and B. And line A and C are perpendicular because they have opposite reciprocal slopes. And that's all we have to do for this here. Now, I was planning on moving on from this here, but I'm going to stop here, make this probably a little bit easier. So this will be the end of 4.32, talking about parallel and perpendicular. What we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to continue on with perpendicular and finding the line, the equation of a line that is perpendicular to a given line. So we'll do that tomorrow, and there will be an assignment attached to that there.